This is the beautiful Golden Tetra, or Hemmigrammus Rodwayi. These fish are coated in tiny little crystals, and those little crystals give them an absolutely electric iridescent gold color when viewed in natural light or really bright tank lights. Today we're going to talk a whole lot more about this incredible species of fish, so get ready to meet the Gold Tetra, an affordable and really cool tetra in our hobby. Hey there, internet people, it's Alex Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. So today we are going to be talking about that beautiful fish, the Golden Tetra, or Hemmigrammus Rodwayi. And as in all my deep dive species spotlights, we're going to talk about the species, be it a fish, a shrimp, or a plant, and we're going to go into deep detail about how it was discovered, when it was discovered, who discovered it, and any interesting facts about its habitat, its evolutionary history or biology, who it's compatible with, how it will do in your tanks, how to care for it, and how to breed it. So if you want to know any of that stuff, please stick with us in this video, this deep dive on Gold Tetras. They're usually $2, $3, $4 at the local store, so they're a really affordable fish that is really incredible and really beautiful too. So if you enjoy this video as we're going through this, please click that like button. It does help spread the video. And also, I noticed that half of you guys who are watching the videos aren't subscribed. So if you want more of these videos, I would appreciate it if you subscribe and click that little bell. If I haven't earned it from you, I hope I can this time by the end of the video or next time. So I will talk to you guys back inside as we talk about the beautiful Hemmigrammus Rodwayi, or the Gold Tetra. The Gold Tetra, or Hemmigrammus Rodwayi, was discovered by the Western world in 1909 by an early American entomologist and ichthyologist named Marion Durbin Ellis. Now, she was born in October 25th, 1887, and she lived until 1972, and she was also married to an ichthyologist by the name of Max Mapes Ellis. And together they are credited with naming over 168 different species and 19 taxa of Hemmigrammus tetras alone. Although the Gold Tetra is named after a Sir Rodwayi, the actual patronym is not necessarily identified formally. However, it is more than likely that the Gold Tetra's Latin name was in honor of James Rodwayi, who lived from 1848 to 1926 and was a travel writer, an artist, a naturalist, and he was someone who participated in Carl Engelmann's collecting trips to South America. Notably, Rodwayi was also at the forefront of the best facial hair in the naturalist world, in my opinion. Yeah, James Rodwayi, the ichthyologist, biologist, and naturalist with a beard so large it didn't even fit in a landscape shot. He might also be up for creepiest ghostly eyes, like Rasputin or something. No offense to his family. Gold Tetras are native to South America, and they're found on the coast, specifically the creeks, floodplains, rivers, and tributaries of Brazil, French Guiana, Guyana, and Peru. They can also be found in parts of Suriname, but it's not known if they're native there. Now, their name is a slight misnomer due to their varied color depending on location and whether they were born in the wild or tank raised. So this potential color range is found in the species and has a source that really confused taxonomists for over 100 years. Gold Tetra's scientific name, Hemmigrammus Rodwayi, are not naturally gold, and in fact they are a silver grayish blue. In fact, you can kind of see that on some of these here. They do have some colors in their fins, including a black, red, gold, and white as well as blue tone depending on the collection point, and they always have that kind of bluish silver gray base, but they are not always covered in this vivid golden powder. So when scientists first discovered the ones with the golden hue, they assigned them the Hemmigrammus Rodwayi, and they thought for sure they were a new species, but they were mistaken. So if you hear Gold Tetras referred to as Hemmigrammus armstrongi, rest assured, still the same fish. It just means it isn't a Gold Tetra. It's basically a synonym for the same fish. Now, that also might confuse you that it's called the Gold Tetra when they're not naturally actually a gold color by default. They can be that blue, a brass, or a silver color, and oftentimes don't have any gold at all, or kind of a mix of both. But they are notable and sought after in that gold color form, and the fish's body actually creates that beautiful gold color as a response to a parasite. And the parasitic infection is caused by a microscopic little creature called a trematode. And the trematode irritates the skin and the scales of the fish, and in response, the fish creates more iridescent and bright iridophores. Now, iridophores are the little crystals that exist in all fish's scales, and they form while the fish is growing in the flesh and the scales of many fish, and they basically reflect natural light. Well, they reflect any light, but they really reflect and refract the UV light in their habitat, which both attracts mates and also scatters light for schooling fish, so that bigger fish see them as kind of like a giant creature all in one, or if they're alone, it actually breaks up their figure so that they're not as easily consumed. Now, the crystals that make up these beautiful iridophores and the golden color on them are made of guanine. And when the fish gets infected by this trematode parasite, it actually has an autoimmune response, and kind of like we would get a runny nose, their slime coat starts shedding this mucus layer, and their skin, basically as a protective measure, almost like a scab, starts forming more and more of those natural iridophores, which, like I said, they're what make all fish that sparkly silver color. So all fish have pigment of, the colors that they express when they're spawning and all the different bright colors you can imagine, but then they have that iridescent shimmer, that metallic look, and that is from the guanine crystals. And they really are crystals. They look just like the crystals found on the Dark Side of the Moon album cover. The prism on the Pink Floyd album, where the light goes through and then it scatters into a whole rainbow. Well, that exact same thing is going on a microscopic level hundreds of thousands of times on these little 1-inch fish. So, these crystals coat the fish and they refract the UV light, as I was saying, and it is just really beautiful. They're actually in this tank right now because of just how brightly gold they can shimmer when they're under bright light. Now, they do like slightly dimmer conditions, ideally, but these ones, they seem to be okay. They've been in captivity for a little while now. So the parasite itself, having an interesting reproductive cycle, uses that gold shimmer to cause these tetras to stand out to their mates, and thus to enter into more physical contact with more of the fish that it can infect. Along with that route of introduction of the parasite into these fish, it also makes them way more UV conductive, and it makes them reflect that light all over their body, and that causes larger fish to see them as one glowing orb of UV light or white light. And basically that powdered gold makes them look like a homing beacon for what to eat for lunch. And so then the trematode gets into the belly of the larger fish, and the trematode then has babies, and the cycle continues. So these fish are definitely a really neat one, and they can be handled by beginning fish hobbyists, but they are a little more susceptible to skin and scale conditions than some other fish, and they are also kind of notably a challenge to breed in captivity. So there may even be some sort of pro Tetra symbiotic balance between the trematode parasite and the vitality of these fish. We don't know. They're just pretty tricky to spawn in captivity. Now, since they travel in shoals of 6 fish or more, you will likely see a variety of different colors and different amounts of that reflection based on how each fish's immune system handled the infection. So you'll know, though, that it was a wild caught one if it does have that gold, like you see those two on the left, well, now they're in the center, having. So, however, the beautiful powdery gold will not be present on the babies of captive bred gold adult tetras. In the offspring of wild-born gold tetras, they don't have any of that trematode infection, and in fact it doesn't seem to be communicable in captivity. So there may be some element we don't quite understand in science right now about how it survives on these fish in the wild, but it just doesn't produce that effect. Needless to say, they're still an incredibly beautiful fish. When you take a look at some that are less golden, like this one right now that's facing us, and now it's headed up towards the top of the frame, still beautifully iridescent silver and blues are present, but not quite that stunning gold that they're named for. So the range of the Hemmigrammus Rodwayi is a really wide one. They are found all across South America in coastal ranges, and specifically in the creeks and floodplains and the rivers or tributaries of rivers, streams, in Brazil, French Guiana, Peru, Suriname, and Guyana, as I was saying. And they enjoy two main major biotopes, and the first is slow-moving rivers or kind of streams and tributaries that flood out into the jungle and lakes, as well as kind of scrubby lands on the coast. And some of these fish can actually even handle brackish water conditions if they're mild. So the second biotope that they are native to and that they can be found in further inland, like in Peru specifically, is the flooded forest and rolling hills, which become islands in the wet season. And they can be found thousands of miles away from their friends of the same species out on the coast. So, assuming the size of these fish is quite small, and these are adults here, they are most happy when they're kept in large groups, like most nano schooling fish. And you may assume that you would only need a small tank, like a 10-gallon for these, but really you should have a 20 long or something larger. This is a 22 long here. They are a really shy fish and a peaceful fish, and so they can be kept in a community, but you don't want to keep them with anything too aggressive, like cichlids or anything like that may just scare them all the time and keep them hiding. But in general, this is their max size. They only reach about 1.5 inches or 4.5 to 6 centimeters, very max. They are unfussy eaters, and they are most colorful and lively when kept in a planted tank. They really like the decor, like rocks and sticks and things they can hide behind, as well as like fine leaf plants. But, they'll be okay in pretty much any planted tank. As for water conditions, they should be kept in a neutral to acidic water with a pH between 5.5 on the low end and 7.4 on the very high end. Neutral is really kind of the high end that they should be kept in most of the time, but because they are found in brackish water sometimes in the wild, technically they can withstand that, and if they're bred in captivity, they're more than likely going to be able to withstand that. But wild-caught ones, you really want to keep under 7.0 pH, so under that neutral and in an acidic tank ideally. So they also like a TDS that's pretty low, between 50 and 180, and perhaps most importantly, they need low nitrates, especially the wild-caught ones, because they have a somewhat damaged immune system due to that parasitic infection that gives them this beautiful color. You can also add dried leaves like Catawba almond leaves and things like that, which can help make up for the deficit in their slime coat and in their immunity naturally. But keeping low nitrates will really help prevent everything that seems to spiral out of control when you get ick or when you get bloat or dropsy or any other problems that little tetras seem to get frequently. So for tank raised specimens, that isn't really necessary, but in general, it will be appreciated by them, and you'll definitely be rewarded by a way more active fish like you're seeing these ones right now that come out into the open more and that have a lot more vivid hues and different subtle tones in their markings. So the other thing that these fish ideally feel most at home in is a tank with plenty of biofiltration and slight flow. So they like that because it provides some oxygenation. So you probably want to keep them in a tank with a sponge filter or a hang off the back filter, and that will make them most comfy. Some people even like a low power head for them to do kind of a hill stream setup for them. As mentioned earlier, captive spawning is fairly difficult, but it is possible, and the males are a little noticeably different from the females because of their anal fin. The females don't have a white patch on their anal fin, whereas the males do, and it colors up, and sometimes there's even a little bit of blue in there. Also, the females are going to be rounder and have big old round bellies full of eggs when they are ready to spawn. So that's kind of how you can tell the two sexes apart. Now, to captively breed these fish in a tank, it is likely that you'll need to mimic a shortened wet to dry cycle or dry to wet cycle and kind of mimic their natural season. They're a seasonal spawner, and this can be done by slowly raising the temperature, KH, GH, or TDS, as well as lowering the water levels and adding more tannins and more acidity for a month or two, along with the introduction of live food for the adults and the fry. So the adults will need to actually see the infusoria and microscopic organisms that are there for their babies to eat, or they won't spawn, which is kind of interesting. So you want to make sure that you've got any sort of little infusoria or paramecium ready in the tanks when you put them in when you're trying to spawn them. Now, the parents are going to be more likely to eat something like larvae or worms or baby brine shrimp or daphnia, and that will keep their colors nice and bright as well. So when you're ready to spawn them, you want to have been feeding them a high protein diet, which those live insects and larvae, copepods, worms, that will totally do that. But after several weeks of that, as well as those water changes, you can then get the water all the way up to around 80 to 84 degrees and all the way as low as 5.5 to 6.0 pH. And you want the TDS at its highest around 180 to 200 parts per million. At that point, they will feel like they're in the middle of summer, the middle of the dry season. And to induce the wet season or the rainy season and the spawning, you'll need to increase the pH higher and get the water close to 7.0 or neutral. Drop that TDS or the KH and GH by adding RO water or distilled water with nothing in it really. And then you want to drop the temperature of the water 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, which will mimic the rain and the cooling effect that it has when it flows into the rivers. Now also when that happens, you can add more flow on the tank, another air stone, and you want to dim the lights as well. Everything you can to kind of mimic a stormy, cloudy day. So ideally, if you can, you want to do this on a day where a low pressure front moves into your region, such as like the night before there is stormy weather, or if it's been sunny right before it turns to rainy weather. And that low barometric pressure in the atmosphere will actually help you spawn them. So lastly, it should be noted, for a successful spawn, the parents definitely need to be kept away from the eggs and the fry. So you either want to use a method of a thick spawning mop that they can really get into to lay their eggs, or you want to put a mesh divider or grate down in the middle of the tank, somewhere in here, so that when the parents lay the eggs, they fall down below. You can also use my alternative favorite, which is using marbles or pea gravel, and then they'll drop the eggs down into that, and you can put a little bit of moss or a little bit of sawasser or something like that in the water, so they feel like they're laying their eggs on something, and then it'll fall down in between the rocks, and they're less apt to eat it literally in the minutes following them just giving birth. So leaving the eggs in the spawning tank is probably the most effective way to spawn them, and probably the simplest way to do things. The eggs will hatch within 72 hours, and by keeping the eggs in the spawning tank, you will then leave the fry, which are super teeny, like an eyelash cut into thirds. You'll leave them all that food that's growing on the leaves and the well-cycled tank. So after they hatch and lose their egg sacs, it will take 3 to 6 days for the fry to become free-swimming and able to consume live foods. And live foods is what the fry will need to eat, and they will eat it all day feverishly for the next 3 to 5 weeks. So you want to make sure there's a whole bunch of tiny little microorganisms or algae and places for that microfauna to survive. Or you need to feed them like 10 times a day if they are in a sterile glass bottom tank. So after this, you may feed them larger food at the about 6-week mark. You can feed them brine shrimp, daphnia, or mosquito larvae, or you can crumble even flake food or granules. They're pretty unpicky. The adults are even less picky, and most, even though they're wild caught, will readily eat flake food after they're about a ½ inch long. So as long as they're ½ an inch long or so when you get them in the store, they should be fine to just eat whatever you want to provide them. Now, I hope you've gotten to know this amazing little Nano Tetra a little bit more, and that you may have found something that piques your interest in the story of these fish. I mean, whether it's the fact that a woman in her 30s discovered these fish and was able to publish that at the turn of the 20th century, and that her and her husband were famous ichthyologists that named 19 other little tetras, including finding the ember tetra. They didn't end up naming it, but they found it, and the glow light tetra, and all the other cool things like the gold crystals that are on them. Now, they're not elemental gold, but they're guanine. They're made out of guanine, and that makes them actual little translucent crystals, which is pretty cool. So between all of that stuff, I hope you found something that was pretty interesting about these fish, and that maybe you'll give them a try next time you see them in the store, especially if they're looking so beautiful and golden. So thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you guys next time on The Secret History of Living in Your Aquarium. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.